And so it doesn't require mowing. The reason why we have the center mowed is because one of the things you'll notice when you venture out, and hopefully give you time to do that, is there's a lot of bees out there right now visiting those flowers. And so if you wanted to kind of mitigate that, didn't want to have so many bees around, you can keep it mowed. And some really good examples with the sod here, that you can see that you can just basically keep it out of the flowering state. But typically it's going to be flowering for most of the growing season under normal unmowed circumstances. So I need to start and differentiate. KURAPIA is the scientific name you may have heard before. You probably have. It's called Lipia nodiflora. Now I think they've changed the genus to Phyla, but it's one of those plants that typically has kind of just been referred to in our industry by the scientific name, like, oh, it's Lipia. Well, Lipia, you may know that there is a type which I would call naturalized. I mean, we tend to throw the word native around. You know, how many millions of years do you have to be here to be native? I don't know. If it's just millions, you could count all of our turf grasses. They've been here that long as well. So I could say more naturalized Lipia is out there, and it's sort of like not really, sort of frowned upon by today's landscape architects and designers, because they consider it kind of invasive. And the reason why it's invasive is because those thousands of flowers produce many thousands of, hundreds of thousands, millions of seed, and that seed is viable. That's with the naturalized Lipia. However, KURAPIA was selected in Japan and developed there, bred, for various traits, and one of the things that you're seeing here with KURAPIA is that it is sterile. What you're looking at behind me, is sterile, so it doesn't produce viable seed. It's also kind of been through the invasive tests that UC Davis does, and so it's past that. So it's not considered invasive, but we as professionals here, we need to differentiate that to the public that, hey, yes, it's the same species, but this is not an invasive type KURAPIA. So you have Mr. Kuramoji, who was the gentleman who found this in Japan and developed it. So Kura, and then Lipia, and that's how we have KURAPIA. And so again, it's that species that some of you have just kind of referred to in the past as Lipia, but there's hopefully you now understand some of the differences. What it was developed for, cold tolerance, which there are some limitations. I'll talk about that in a moment. Obviously, there's some flowering types, different flowering types. The one that we have right now in California is what you see here is a white flower, but there's some other ones, other flower colors, other propensity to flowering types. There's some that don't flower as much. But what was really intriguing to me and what I was asked to look at was more of the water use characteristics, and it's really quite good in terms of I would say comparable and probably in a lot of cases better than the warm season turf grasses in terms of water use. And then we've also done work with salinity, and it's extremely salt tolerant, which is nice for those of us or your customers who are using reclaimed water. And as you've seen today, we test things kind of to the extreme, and we did that with like water that was over 3,000 parts per million, 4 decisiemens in salt. That's very extreme, and KURAPIA did quite well to do that. So in today's climate, let's just face it, I mean, I love turf, but not a lot of people are loving turf these days, and so anything is better than turf in a lot of people's minds. And so I think this is, one of those things that if we can't convince you or the public, that what you see today, I hope you've seen that we in fact can manage turf with less water. But if people are still not buying that, then I think this is something to look at as an alternative. So, okay, so Talked a little bit about that, what it could do best, and I mean, there's questions came up before. Probably not intensive shade, like you're never going to get sun type of thing. It's probably not, most plants, not really, there's not a lot. I mean, there's some that can deal with that, but I'd say if you're getting at least some partial sun, I think KURAPIA is going to be okay. But not like really intensive shade. And then the traffic is another thing. You don't want it to be, if it's getting a lot of traffic, that's can be problematic as well. But again, where you're letting it go kind of in a natural state, I don't think you're going to have too many people trouncing around with all the bees out there. And so again, if people are not into their lawn anymore, the front lawn, that's not going to get as much traffic. It's more for aesthetic purposes. Maybe the backyard where the kids are going to play, maybe save some turf for that. But KURAPIA would be a good choice for the front lawn, or obviously landscape beds and whatnot. Let's see, what else? Cold tolerance, yeah. It does have pretty good cold tolerance, except not, I think in California, the extreme would be what I consider the high elevations, the Sierras. That's like harsh winters. You think you're probably going to get some kill there, but under more moderate winters, like for example in Riverside, you'll get a little bit of dieback, depending on how cold, how many frosts there are. But it's going to come back in the spring, and so you're going to get a little off color. And of course, the closer you get to the ocean, where the temperature is moderated, I don't think you're going to change much from what you see now in terms of that. Propagation-wise, like as I mentioned, I thought it was really interesting. The more I work with this, how it sort of can behave like sod, and this definition of sod in the case of turf, it's the turfgrass plant in the underlying soil. In this case, it's the KURAPIA plant in the underlying soil, but it has such an extensive root system that you can cut sod and it keeps its integrity, that it could be transplanted as such. And so West Coast turf and Delta bluegrass are two sod producers in the state that now produce KURAPIA. That's good. And also for maybe the homeowner, smaller plantings, it's available, and I have that in the booklet. Again, if you don't have your booklet, you can reference that later. But there's the places where you can get plugs of KURAPIA. That's listed in the booklet. Okay, so now let's talk about a little bit more about management. Again, with anything that when we talk about whatever the drought tolerance is, establishment is not the time to withhold water when you're establishing something, any kind of plant species. But once you get it established, and this is what I consider mature KURAPIA, it doesn't need a whole lot of water, it doesn't need a whole lot of fertilizer. Again, I think the fertility would be more of during the establishment phase. And then the big challenge, I think, for us is the weed management. And so we've done some studies looking at herbicide tolerance during establishment, and then also at maturity. And I would say the best course, and this is often true with turf as well, is pre-emergent herbicides. Good timing of pre-emergent herbicides. You're going to get most all the weeds you're going to deal with. And so for us here in Riverside, it'd be like August, September for the winter annuals, January, February for the summer annuals, and you should be pretty good with that. What if you get grassy weeds in your KURAPIA? Well, we've got Fusilade, and I would also say Suboxidam, I think is grass getter, and those are going to get most of the grassy weeds, and they're very safe on KURAPIA. The challenge is controlling the broadleaf in a broadleaf ground cover. And so what I've given you here today is just an example of what you can kind of expect. In most cases here, it doesn't look good, right? But I'd say 99%, maybe only one area, and I think still this is going to recover what's green, but the high rate of turf lawn really, it killed some of that KURAPIA. But it didn't kill it all, so it's going to recover. But everything else you see here, although it's not pretty right now, I'll make a bet that it all recovers. And so I hope you don't have to get to that point, or you know, your customers don't have to get to that point. Like I said, if you use the pre-emergent program, I think you wouldn't have to really deal with it. And obviously, the idea, just like, you know, establishing a good stand of turf, you know, that's your best course of keeping weeds out. You want to do the same thing with KURAPIA, but if you do need to, this is kind of what you can expect. It's you know, you have to put up with a little bit of injury to get some of the broadleaves if you choose that course. Or, like this case, what's this weed here? Spurge? Yeah. And so it looks like even some of our herbicides here are not getting that spurge. Spurge is an annual. If we you know, do the right things, or you use the right pre-emergent herbicides, we should get these guys so they won't come up and you won't deal with that. But you know, now you know, one course is like, say, okay, I have these weed problems. Next year I'm going to make sure I have the proper program in place so they don't emerge and we don't deal with those issues. Any questions? I don't want to be talking on the whole time. Yes?
So what is it about the plant that renders it drought tolerant? Is it the fact that it's broadleaf reducing evaporation from the soil, or is it something physiologically?
Well, you know, I haven't explored that intensively in terms of like the hows and why, but I would say that just the root system, and even I would consider some of those to be even rhizomes underneath there. It's quite extensive, and I think, you know, when we've subjected it to extreme conditions, it seems to, like, it's got a lot of reserves down there to deal with that. So I would say that's one thing. I mean,
is it deep rooting, or is it?
I think it's pretty deep rooting. What, Mark? What have you seen in terms of rooting?
Yeah, the averagely it reaches about 3 feet. And if with a sandy soil, it can reach about 10 feet.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, and again, the watering aspect, we have to be careful. I mean, yeah, we're in a really fairly dry climate, but that canopy is very dense.
Yeah.
You know, the root system is dense, and so we got to be careful that people don't overwater, because you think about a dense canopy, all of a sudden you increase the relative humidity of the air may not be that high, but then if you have a wet canopy, that's going to increase that, and then, you know, fungi and other pathogens like that kind of environment. So we have to be mindful of that. But yeah, obviously, yeah, rooting is always a function of you know, the soil type. You know, like I said, it's not something that's going to get a lot of intensive traffic. Usually, unless you really like weeds. But other questions?
Does it spread within the landscape?
It does spread laterally. Well, it does spread laterally some, and it requires some pruning, so to speak. Yeah. So, but I wouldn't call it, you know, again, not no. If you didn't get the so-called naturalized lithia is very viable, and that's why many consider that invasive. This is a sterile hybrid, if you will. Yes.
With the bees, where do you see this being used? I mean, that eliminates recreational use, doesn't it?
Unless, yeah, Brian, unless you keep it mowed. Like, you could keep it in this state, really, where you wouldn't have the flowering, and you know, we haven't played around. Again, you know, I mean, yeah, there's always, you know, you would consider thinking you have kind of a more of a natural thing instead of like chemical management. But you know, like the low rate of turf lawn there is like chemically managing the flower, and it's not even touching the foliage. And so there are ways of doing that, but I think mowing would probably be the best, even though that's, you know, that's input, right? But yeah, it's more of the it's more of that you know, you want to photosynthesizing, you know, green ground cover. and you don't like turf. Turf is bad, and so this is an alternative for that. But yeah, the bee aspect is certainly something. I mean, nothing against bees, right? But I'm personally not a big bee fan. This KURAPIA, that is, most of it's, by the way, we had to add a little bit because this was the former herbicide study in the entirety, and we had some herbicides out here that not only were very harsh on the KURAPIA, but they were like sterile. They kept the soil clean, and so we came in and we sodded those, and that's why you kind of see the undulations out there. But this is 2 years. Most of the stand is like 2 years old.
Okay, that's not, and then how should we have to worry about it developing big thatch on us? If it's mowed frequently?
No, it's not. It's not something. Again, water.